The desert stretched endlessly beyond the sleek walls of the ship. Dust and sand whipped in the wind, but inside the metallic craft, the air was still. It was cold. Too cold, even for a place like this. He stared at her, the alien girl. Her purple skin glowed faintly in the dim light, like she was part of the ship itself, a living piece of metal and mystery. Her armor was tight, wrapping around her body like a second skin, a living suit that seemed to breathe with her. It clung to her curves, accentuating her every movement. He had never seen anything like her before. She wasn't just alien in appearance. There was something about her, something different. Powerful. Dangerous. Yet there was a strange pull, something irresistible drawing him closer. He took a step forward, his boots clicking softly against the metal floor. His eyes locked onto hers. She didn't flinch. She didn't move. She just watched him, a faint smile curling at the corner of her lips. "Take it off," he said, his voice low, almost a whisper. He wasn't sure if it was a command or a question, but it didn't matter. The words had escaped him before he could stop them. Her smile only grew. "You think you can take me on?" she asked, her voice smooth, like silk. It was playful, almost teasing. He hesitated. Was she mocking him? He didn't know, but something told him to keep going. His hands reached for the clasp of her armor, the sleek, dark material cool to the touch. But as soon as his fingers brushed it, the armor responded. It tightened, squeezing her body even more. A jolt of electricity ran through his fingertips, sending a wave of tension up his arm. The girl didn't flinch. She didn't even blink. "What's wrong?" she asked, her voice soft, but there was a challenge in it. "Can't handle it." His heart raced. The armor, it wasn't just some protective layer. It was alive. He could feel it now, the way it responded to him. But there was no turning back now. He wasn't going to back down. His hand pressed harder against the armor, his fingers curling into the material. She didn't stop him. The more he pushed, the tighter it became, wrapping around her body like an unbreakable seal. She tilted her head, watching him struggle. "It's not that easy," she murmured, her voice filled with amusement. "You'll have to try harder than that if you want to see what's underneath." The more he tried, the more the armor squeezed. It was almost as if it was rejecting him, fighting back. But there was something else there too, something strange. Something sexual. He could feel it now, the electricity running through his hands. It wasn't just from the armor. It was from her. Her eyes were locked on his, almost daring him to push further. To try harder. His heart pounded in his chest. His breath came faster, quicker. This wasn't just about getting the armor off. It was about her. She was controlling him. He could feel it, every inch of his body. "Do you want to know what happens next?" she whispered, her lips barely moving. She leaned closer, her scent filling the air. It was intoxicating. "You think you're in control, but you're not." "Not yet." He took a step back, his mind racing. What was going on? He didn't know, but the pull was too strong. He couldn't let go. Not yet. But just as he thought he might finally get it off, the armor did something unexpected. It shifted. The tightness around her body loosened just enough for him to breathe again. But it wasn't enough. She smiled, her lips curling into something almost predatory. "I told you," she said softly, "you're going to have to work harder." Much harder. He stepped back again, a sense of frustration building inside him. What was it that she wanted? What was it about this armor that made it so impossible to get past? What was she hiding underneath? As the air thickened with tension, he realized one thing: this wasn't just about armor. It was a game. A game she was winning, but he wasn't ready to give up just yet. With one last glance at her, he took another step closer, determined to finish what he started. The girl watched him, her eyes dancing with amusement. She knew what was coming. And so did he. But would he be able to break through her armor? Or would he find himself trapped in her game, forever? Cliffhanger ending. He reached out once more, but this time, the armor did not tighten. Instead, it shifted, almost willingly. His hand brushed against her side, and for a split second, he felt her warmth. Ready for more? She asked softly, her voice a challenge. Let's see how far you're willing to go. Naughty question for the comments. Do you think he'll ever break through her armor? Or is he playing a game he'll never win? The air in the ship felt thick, charged with electricity, and not just from the buzzing lights above. It was from her, no, from both of them. He couldn't deny it anymore. There was something pulling him towards her, something primal. But every time he thought he was getting closer, the armor squeezed tighter. His fingers still tingled from the electric shock earlier, and now, he was more determined than ever. He wasn't backing down, not now, not when he was so close. His hand hovered just above the living armor, and for a moment, he considered just walking away. But he wasn't going to let her win, not like this. Not when he'd come so far. She sat there, casually, watching him with an amused smile. Her purple skin glowed softly under the lights, and the tightness of her suit only emphasized the curves of her body. He could feel the heat rising in his chest. It was impossible to ignore her presence. You really think you can take me on? Her voice was teasing, almost mocking, but there was something else in it, a challenge. He looked at her, his jaw clenched. I'm not going to back down. Her eyes sparkled with amusement. I don't need you to back down. But I can tell you're not ready yet. She stood up, slowly, her body shifting gracefully beneath the tight armor. The movement only caused the suit to tighten around her. It seemed to react to her every movement, adjusting itself as if alive. He took a step forward, but as soon as he got close enough to touch her, the armor responded, squeezing. Not painfully, but firmly, as if reminding him who was in control. What's wrong? She asked, her voice low, almost purring. You can feel it, can't you? The more you try to get through it, the more it fights you back. His heart pounded in his chest. There was no way this was just about the armor anymore. It was about her. She was in control. But somehow, that only made him want to try harder. Let's see if you can handle it. She stepped forward, closing the distance between them. Her presence was intoxicating. He could feel the heat radiating off her, and her eyes never left his. She wasn't afraid. You're playing a dangerous game, he said, trying to mask the tension in his voice. She laughed softly, shaking her head. No. I'm not playing a game. You are. You think you know what you're dealing with, but you don't. You're not ready for what's coming next. Her words stung, but they also ignited something inside him. He wasn't ready? No, that wasn't an option. He stepped forward again, his hands reaching for the armor, determined to tear it off, no matter the cost. But once again, as his fingers brushed against the surface, the armor responded. This time, it didn't just tighten around her. It shifted, pressing more firmly against his hands. It was almost like it was alive, sensing his frustration, his desire. He gritted his teeth, pushing harder. The moment his hand slid over the material, he felt it again, the shock. But this time, it wasn't just electricity. It was something else. It was like a pulse, a wave of energy that shot through his body, making him feel something deep inside. She moaned softly, the sound barely audible, but it was enough. Enough to make him pause. Feel it? She asked, her voice now a whisper. The armor's not just protecting me. It's reacting to you. To your touch. It knows you want more. He took a shaky breath. The pulse of energy was unlike anything he had ever felt. It wasn't just about the armor anymore. It was about her, and him, and the chemistry between them. You don't get it, do you? She said softly. The more you struggle, the tighter it gets. The more you want, the more it pushes back. His breath caught in his throat. The way she spoke, so confidently, so provocatively, it was almost too much to handle. But he was in too deep now. He wasn't turning back. "Is that all you've got?" she teased, her fingers brushing lightly against his chest. "Come on, show me you're not as weak as you look." Her touch sent a shiver down his spine. Every inch of his body screamed for more, but he knew he had to stay focused. If he didn't, she'd win. If he didn't, he'd lose the only chance he had. "Maybe you don't know what you're messing with," he said, his voice low and full of tension. His hands moved to her side again, feeling the armor's living surface shift beneath his touch. She smiled. It was a smile full of secrets, a smile that made his blood run hot. "Maybe you're not ready to find out," she whispered, leaning closer. But just as he thought he might lose himself in the moment, she pulled away, almost too quickly. Her eyes were full of mischief, like she knew something he didn't. "Don't think this is over," she said, her voice trailing off. "It's only just beginning." Cliffhanger ending. He stared at her, his heart still racing, his mind struggling to process what had just happened. Her armor, her touch, the strange power between them, it was all too much to ignore now. But just as he moved closer to her once again, the lights in the room flickered. A loud noise echoed through the ship. She turned, her expression shifting from playful to serious. "We have company," she murmured. "And I'm afraid you won't like who's coming." Naughty question for the comments. Do you think he can finally get through her armor? Or is she just toying with him? Let us know what you think. The ship shook, a deep rumble vibrating through the walls, as if warning them both that something big was coming. His heart skipped a beat, but his eyes stayed locked on her, even as the alien girl's presence seemed to fill the room. Her armor still clung to her body, pressing against every curve, almost like it was a part of her. But now, there was something else in the air. It wasn't just the tension between them. It was energy. Raw, pulsing energy, like electricity crackling between them, waiting to be unleashed. She stood up, her movements fluid, almost predatory. Her body shifted, and the armor adjusted, becoming even tighter around her, almost as if it had heard her command. The pressure seemed to grow stronger with every passing second, and it made him feel like he was about to lose control. But something inside him refused to give up. He wasn't just after the armor anymore, he wanted to understand her. He wanted to break past the walls she'd built around herself. "You think you can handle it?" she asked, her voice smooth, but laced with something dark. Her eyes burned with an intensity he could almost feel in his bones. "I don't have a choice," he said, his voice rough, almost daring her to push him further. She smiled, but it wasn't the playful grin from earlier. This time, there was something dangerous about it, something that made his stomach tighten. "You're right. You don't have a choice." She took a step toward him, and the space between them shrank. Her body was close now, almost too close. He could feel the heat radiating off her, the strange hum of power that seemed to come from within her. He reached out, instinctively, his fingers brushing against her armored side again. The armor responded immediately, tightening even more, but this time, something else happened. The pulse of energy that shot through him wasn't just the static shock from before. This time, it was like a wave of heat and power, flowing through his hand and up his arm, sending shivers down his spine. She moaned softly, and it sent a shock through him, his body reacting in ways he couldn't control. "You can feel it, can't you?" she asked, her voice barely more than a whisper. "It's not just the armor. It's me. The armor is alive, yes, but it's me who controls it. And you? You can't handle me yet." His grip tightened on her side, and he could feel the armor shift again, almost as if it was anticipating his every move. It was more than just protection, it was power. The power to control, to manipulate. And for a split second, he wondered if he had underestimated her from the beginning. But he wasn't backing down. Not now. His eyes met hers. There was something dangerous about the way she was looking at him, like she could see straight through him. "What's it going to take to break through?" he asked, his voice filled with frustration, but also determination. She let out a low laugh, one that made his blood boil with frustration and desire. You think you're the one in control? You think you can break through it? No. It's not about the armor. It's about me. You'll never get past it if you don't understand that. He stared at her, his breath coming faster. She was right. This wasn't just about getting the armor off. This was a game she was in complete control of, and he was nothing but a player. But just as he was about to take another step toward her, the lights flickered once more, and the ship gave another violent shake. He looked around, confused, but the girl's gaze never wavered. I told you, she said, her voice calm, almost too calm. We have company. A moment later, the ship's door slid open, and the sound of footsteps echoed in the hallway outside. His heart stopped for a beat. He wasn't alone anymore. Her eyes gleamed with something like excitement. They're here, and they won't stop until they have what they came for. Without a word, she turned away from him, her body moving with a fluid grace as she stepped toward the door. The armor shifted once again, but this time, it wasn't squeezing or tightening. It was shifting, almost as if it was preparing for something. He followed her, his thoughts racing. Who were these new people? What did they want? And why did he feel like he was walking into something he wasn't ready for? As he reached the door, the alien girl turned back to him, her eyes flashing with a mixture of warning and something darker. You don't know what you're about to face, she whispered. But if you want to survive, you're going to have to trust me. His pulse raced, and for the first time, he wasn't sure if he was in control anymore. But he couldn't stop now. He was already in too deep. Cliffhanger ending. Just as he stepped through the doorway, the lights in the hallway flickered once more, and a loud, metallic sound filled the air. He could see figures moving in the shadows, tall, imposing shapes that made his heart race. But the girl, she was moving faster than ever. Are you coming? She called back, her voice filled with urgency. The door slammed shut behind him, and the darkness of the hallway seemed to close in. Naughty question for the comments. Do you think he's ready for what's coming? Or will he be left behind in the darkness? The sound of footsteps echoed in the hallway, the rhythmic beat of boots on metal growing louder with each passing second. He didn't know who, or what, was coming for them, but it didn't matter. Not when she was standing in front of him, her alien beauty more powerful than any fear that tried to claw at him. Her eyes flicked to him, glowing with an intensity that sent a rush of heat through his veins. She was calm, almost too calm, as if she knew exactly what was about to happen. But that only made him more nervous. He wasn't prepared for this. No part of him was. He had no idea what he was really dealing with. What now? He asked, his voice hoarse. His hands were shaking slightly, but he was determined not to show it. Not in front of her. She turned to face him, her lips curling into a smile that held more secrets than he could fathom. Now? Now you follow me. Now you trust me. She didn't wait for a response. Instead, she moved forward, her body fluid and graceful, each step seeming calculated, every movement designed to entice. His eyes couldn't help but follow her, but he wasn't just watching her body. He was watching the way she moved, the way her armor seemed to shift with her every action, adjusting itself to fit her as though it were a second skin. It was alive. And so was she. His heart raced as she came to a stop in front of a large door, which slid open with a mechanical hiss. Without a word, she stepped inside, and he hesitated, unsure of what to do. But before he could think too much, he followed her in. The room was dimly lit, shadows playing off the walls as the girl turned to face him. Her presence seemed to fill the space, and it wasn't just her alien beauty anymore. It was the power she radiated, like she could command the very ship they were on. The energy in the room was thick, charged with something he couldn't quite grasp, but it wasn't just the looming threat of their enemies anymore. It was her. I told you, she said, her voice smooth, seductive. You're not the only one with power here. She stepped closer, and he felt a rush of heat flood through him. His body was reacting to her, responding to her presence, to her touch. The air between them grew heavier with every inch she closed. It wasn't just the suit anymore. It was the way she made him feel. She wasn't just an alien. She was temptation, wrapped in a living armor that pressed into his every desire. His pulse quickened, but he wasn't ready to back down. "What do you want from me?" he asked, his voice coming out sharper than he intended. She smiled, the dangerous smile that had haunted him since their first meeting. "I want you to prove something." She reached out, her fingers grazing his chest, sending a jolt of electricity through him. The shock wasn't painful, but it was enough to make him stop breathing for a moment. Her touch lingered, sending heat spiraling down his spine, her fingers inching lower. He couldn't focus on anything else. His mind was racing, his body reacting in ways he couldn't control. He was addicted to her. And she knew it. "You think you can control this?" "Control me?" she asked, her voice teasing, full of amusement. "You're not ready for what I can make you feel." She stepped back, almost too quickly, leaving him breathless, standing there wanting more, needing more. He couldn't stop himself from reaching for her again, desperate to feel that same spark. But just as quickly, she raised her hand, stopping him. "I'm the one who controls you now," she whispered, her eyes gleaming with a dark promise. "If you want to play this game, you'll have to do it on my terms." Her words hit him like a wave, and he was caught in the undertow. He wasn't sure what he wanted anymore. He didn't know whether he was playing her game or if she was playing his. All he knew was that he couldn't walk away now, not after everything he'd been through. Not after feeling the power she had over him. "I'm not afraid of you," he said, his voice rough. "You should be," she replied, her tone turning deadly serious. She moved back, her eyes never leaving his, and her armor shifted once again, adjusting itself around her as if preparing for something. The air in the room was thick with tension, charged with something dangerous, something he could feel in every inch of his body. Then, a sudden crash broke the silence, followed by the sound of clanking metal. The door behind them slammed shut, and he heard the voices, deep and menacing, calling out in the hallway. He turned to look at her, his pulse racing. She smirked, unfazed. "You're not the only one with enemies," she said. "But I'm not done with you yet. Not by a long shot." He opened his mouth to speak, but before he could, she stepped forward again, her hand resting on his chest. The electric current from earlier ran through him again, sending a rush of heat flooding his veins. Then, in one swift motion, she grabbed his wrist, pulling him toward the door. "Come on," she said, her voice low and full of promise. "Let's see if you can handle what's next." Cliffhanger ending. As the door to the room opened, the sound of the enemy's footsteps grew louder. But just before they could step into view, the lights flickered, and the girl turned to him with an intense look. "Whatever happens next," she said, her voice dripping with urgency, "you need to trust me. Now." He nodded, but inside, a part of him wasn't sure if he could. Naughty question for the comments. Do you think he can handle what's coming? Or is he in over his head now? The lights flickered once more, casting shadows that stretched long across the metal walls of the ship. The room they had entered was cold, sterile, nothing like the warmth and fire that seemed to radiate between him and her. But there was no time to think about that now. The voices outside the door were getting closer. The game, as she had called it, was about to begin in earnest. Her grip tightened on his wrist, and he could feel the pressure of her hand, cool and yet somehow charged with energy, sending pulses through his skin. She turned to face him, her eyes locking onto his with an intensity that left him breathless. For a moment, he forgot about the approaching danger. He forgot about the game. All that mattered was her. "You think you're ready for this?" she asked, her voice low, seductive. The words held a dangerous edge, and he could feel his heart racing in anticipation, but also with a healthy dose of fear. He opened his mouth to respond, but the words died in his throat. The way she looked at him, the way her armor shimmered against her body, it was hard to focus on anything else. He couldn't remember the last time he felt so completely at the mercy of someone, or something. "I'm ready," he finally managed to say, his voice hoarse, but filled with something deeper. It was a mix of lust, frustration, and desire. But above all, it was his stubborn determination to not be dominated by her game. He would play along, but only on his terms. She tilted her head, a smile curling up with a mischievous glint in her eyes. "We'll see about that." With that, she pushed open the door just enough to slip through, pulling him after her. The hallway outside was dim, shadows crawling along the walls as the sounds of heavy footsteps echoed off the metal. The girl moved with such fluidity, her body a blur of graceful power as she led the way. He was right behind her, his senses on high alert, watching her every move. The enemies were close now. He could hear them talking, deep voices, low and menacing. He didn't know who they were, but he could tell that they weren't here to talk. This was serious. This was a fight. The girl didn't hesitate. She moved forward, her body pressing against the wall, using the shadows to stay out of sight. She glanced back at him, her eyes locking with his once again. This time, there was a quiet command in her gaze. "Stay close." "Follow my lead," she whispered. He nodded, swallowing the lump in his throat. He wasn't used to this, being led, being the one following someone else's command. But somehow, with her, it felt right. She was in control. She always had been. They moved through the narrow corridors of the ship, the tension building with every step. Every moment that passed, the closer they got to their enemies, the closer they got to what would come next. And he could feel it. There was more to her than the armor, than the teasing, than the game they were playing. There was power in her, power that he didn't fully understand, but desperately wanted to. They reached a large open space, a cargo bay of some sort. It was dark, empty, and silent. But the sound of heavy boots could be heard echoing off the walls. The enemy was right there, close enough that they could almost reach out and touch them. "Wait for my signal," the girl whispered, her voice deadly calm. He could feel the heat in his chest, a mix of adrenaline and something deeper. He didn't know what was about to happen, but he knew one thing: he wasn't about to let her face it alone. This was the moment. The moment where everything would change. The girl stepped forward, her hand moving to the side of her armor. The once tight suit seemed to shift, almost like it was preparing for a fight. He watched in awe as the armor seemed to glow, a soft, almost eerie light emanating from the surface. It was alive. And it was powerful. The sounds of the enemy grew louder, closer. He could see their shadows through the dim light, their figures emerging from the darkness. And then, the girl moved. She stepped into the open, her body moving with precision, with power. Her hand reached out, and the air seemed to hum with the energy around her. The men stopped in their tracks, eyes wide in shock. They weren't expecting this. They weren't expecting her. But she wasn't just a pretty face. She was a force. "Stop right there," she commanded, her voice carrying through the space. "I'm not afraid of you." The men hesitated, their eyes flicking between her and the stranger standing beside her. He was no longer just a bystander. He was part of this, part of whatever game she had been leading him into. And now, they were both in the thick of it. He watched as she moved closer, her eyes never leaving the men. She wasn't afraid. And that made him feel something he hadn't felt before. It wasn't just the heat between them. It was the trust, the way she had shown him time and time again that she was in control. But now, for the first time, he knew that the power wasn't just hers. It was theirs. The men took another step forward, their weapons now drawn, but the girl didn't flinch. Instead, she smiled, her expression dark and full of promise. "Game on," she whispered, her voice dripping with a dark, playful tone. Cliffhanger ending. Before the men could make another move, the lights above them suddenly went out, plunging them all into darkness. He heard the sounds of footsteps, but they weren't from the enemy. The girl's armor pulsed once more, and he knew this was the moment. Naughty question for the comments. Do you think they'll make it out alive? Or will the enemy finally catch up with them? The darkness in the cargo bay was suffocating. The lights had gone out completely, leaving nothing but blackness and the sharp sound of his breath filling the void. The sudden silence was deafening, yet it was also filled with potential. He couldn't see her, but he could feel her. The air around him shifted as if she was moving closer, the subtle hum of her armor vibrating in the quiet. He strained his ears, listening for the footsteps of the men, but the room was eerily still. Even the sound of his own heartbeat seemed louder now, echoing through his chest. A flicker of light. A faint, ethereal glow came from the edges of her armor, illuminating the space just enough to see the soft contours of her body. He caught a glimpse of her as she moved, graceful, fluid, like a shadow gliding through the dark. Her hand reached out, brushing lightly against his arm, sending a shock of electricity through his skin, jolting him to the present. The connection between them was electric, alive, and he could feel it in every part of his body. "Stay close," she whispered, her voice low, almost seductive, sending a shiver down his spine. "I told you, you're not ready for this. But now, we don't have a choice." The words hung in the air between them. There was a vulnerability in her voice that he hadn't heard before. A moment of uncertainty, but it was fleeting. In an instant, she was the confident, commanding alien girl again, leading him deeper into the unknown. Another flicker of light revealed the shadowy figures of their enemies ahead. The men had regrouped, but they were blind in the dark, just like he was. His mind raced, calculating, but the only thing that mattered now was her. He was at her mercy, but for some reason, he wasn't afraid. He trusted her. "Are you ready?" she asked, her voice almost playful, yet there was something darker beneath it. "I won't stop this time. This game is over. We are in control now." He nodded, though the lump in his throat made it difficult to speak. But there was no time to second-guess himself. Not now. They had crossed the line. They were in this together. She moved forward, and he followed without hesitation. There was no question in his mind anymore. He would do whatever it took to survive, with her. They reached the edge of the cargo bay, and the light from her armor illuminated the men standing in their path. They weren't backing down. They weren't afraid of the girl. But what they didn't know was that they didn't need to fear her armor. They needed to fear her. With a sudden, swift movement, she raised her arm, and the air seemed to crackle. Her armor hummed to life, shifting and glowing with a bright intensity. The men froze, their hands hovering over their weapons, uncertain for the first time. The girl smirked, a dangerous, teasing grin that made his blood run hot. "I'm not the one you need to worry about," she said softly, almost with affection, as though she were letting them in on a secret. "It's him." Her eye shifted to him, and it hit him like a wave. She had already decided. She wasn't going to fight them. She wasn't going to take them down. He was. Before he could react, she moved with lightning speed, pushing past him and toward the men. The glow of her armor was almost blinding now, and the hum of energy filled the room. He didn't even know what she was doing, but he knew that whatever it was powerful, beyond anything he'd ever witnessed. She didn't speak another word. Instead, she moved in a blur, faster than the eye could follow, her body a combination of fluid grace and lethal force. The men fired, but their shots went wide, missing her by inches. She didn't give them another chance. With a flick of her wrist, the armor shifted again, and the air around them seemed to hum with raw energy. The men were paralyzed, not from the shock of the armor, but from her sheer presence. She had them trapped. And they couldn't even see it coming. In that moment, he realized something. The game they had been playing wasn't just about the armor. It was about control. It was about power. And now, he was a part of it. He was the one who had to face them. He was the one who had to take his place at her side. The girl had already seen what was coming. She had already decided his role in this story. She wasn't just using him. She was making him. He moved forward, his hands steady despite the adrenaline coursing through him. The tension in the room was unbearable, but the men still had their weapons drawn, and he wasn't sure how to take them down. But she didn't give him time to think. With a sudden burst of energy, her armor surged forward, and a beam of light shot from her wrist, knocking the men off their feet. They weren't dead, but they were incapacitated, lying on the ground, struggling to move. The girl turned to him, her expression unreadable. For a moment, there was no teasing smile. No game. Just raw, dangerous power. You see, she said, her voice steady, but her eyes flashing with an intensity he hadn't seen before. You didn't think you could handle it. But you just did. He stood there, speechless. His body was still thrumming with the energy from the fight. But there was no time to process it. Now, the real game begins, she whispered, as her eyes flicked toward the exit. He nodded, feeling a new understanding dawn on him. Whatever she had planned, whatever she had in store for them, it was only just starting. And he had no choice but to play along. Cliffhanger ending. Just as they turned to leave, the distant sound of an alarm blared through the ship. Something had triggered the security system. And they were running out of time. Naughty question for the comments. Do you think he's ready for what she has planned next? Or will he get lost in her game? The alarm screamed through the ship like a siren of doom, its high-pitched wail rattling his bones. The lights flickered and hummed, casting harsh shadows across the dim corridor. His heart raced, the adrenaline pumping through his veins as the girl's hand gripped his arm, pulling him forward. We have to move, she whispered, urgency in her voice that he hadn't heard before. There was no teasing now, no playful banter. She was all business. The enemy was close, the countdown was on, and there was no time for hesitation. They ran, their footsteps echoing in the narrow passage, weaving through dark corners and hidden doors. The ship was vast, but the closer they got to the heart of it, the more they were cornered. He could hear them, the soldiers, the ones who had been after her since the beginning. The ones who had no idea what they were about to face. The girl moved with purpose, her body a blur of motion, but he wasn't far behind. His chest burned with every step, but it wasn't just from the physical exertion. He was chasing something now, a feeling, an instinct, he was chasing her. The sound of their enemies grew louder. He could hear them approaching fast. His grip tightened on the handle of the blaster she'd given him, though he wasn't sure how to use it. His hand shook, but he didn't stop. He couldn't stop now. She turned to him suddenly, her eyes flashing in the dim light. This is it. The final test. I need you to trust me. You've got to do exactly as I say. He didn't have time to question her. He had already trusted her this far. And now, he was all in. She pushed open a metal door, and they stepped into a large control room. The walls were lined with monitors, flickering with static as alarms blared and lights flashed. The girl moved swiftly, hitting a few keys on the console in front of her. Get ready, she said, her voice calm but filled with warning. Ready for what? He asked, his breath shallow, his heart hammering in his chest. Her lips curved into that dangerous smile, the one he knew all too well. This, she said simply. And with one final press of a button, the entire room went dark. The hum of the ship's engines died down, leaving only the sound of their breathing. The absence of light was disorienting, but before he could react, she grabbed his arm again, pulling him toward the back of the room. The door behind them slammed shut, the echo deafening. There was no going back now. The final moment had arrived. And then, everything changed. A burst of light filled the room as the control panel powered back on, the monitors flashing with data and coordinates. She was activating something big. But it wasn't just the ship that was coming to life. It was her. Her body shuddered, and for a moment, he thought she was in pain. But then, the glow of her armor intensified, almost blinding him as she stood taller, more powerful. Get ready, she whispered, her eyes locking onto his. There was no fear in her gaze, only purpose. We're going to need all the power we can get to make it out of here. He didn't have time to process her words before the ship's walls began to tremble, a violent shaking that threw him off balance. The enemy was at the door. And the countdown was ticking down. Now, she yelled, her voice full of authority. She grabbed his hand, pulling him into a hidden hatch beneath the floor. The moment they slid through, the entire room exploded with sound, gunfire, shouting, the chaos of battle. They were underground now, deep in the ship's maintenance tunnels. The walls were narrow, the air thick with tension. He could hear the footsteps of their enemies above, hunting them down. He didn't know how much time they had left, but he knew one thing for sure: this was it. The final test. The moment that would determine if they both survived. The girl stopped abruptly, pulling him to a halt just as a hatch opened in front of them. There was a ship, a small escape pod, barely big enough for both of them. It was their only chance. But before they could make their move, the door to the tunnel slid open behind them. They weren't alone anymore. He raised the blaster instinctively, aiming it at the door as the figures emerged from the shadows. But just as he prepared to fire, the girl stepped forward, her armor glowing brighter than ever. "No," she said, her voice cool and commanding. "I'm the one who ends this." The men froze, staring at her as she stepped into the light. She was no longer just the alien girl who had played with him, who had led him into the game. She was something else. Something powerful. Something dangerous. Her eyes flashed as she raised her hand, and the air around them seemed to pulse with raw energy. The men attempted to draw their weapons, but they were too slow. She struck first, the force of her energy slamming them back against the walls with a single wave of her hand. The power of her armor surged, brightening to an almost blinding light. The last of their enemies crumpled to the floor, defeated, as she stepped forward, looking at him with an expression he couldn't read. "Now, we're free," she said, her voice steady, yet softer than before. "You've made it this far. But this is only the beginning." The escape pod door hissed open, the escape route now clear. Cliffhanger ending. Just as they stepped into the pod, the ship's alarm blared again, this time louder than ever. The countdown had reached 0. The ship was about to explode. Naughty question for the comments. Do you think they'll make it out alive? Or is this the end of their journey?